Thank you for joining the fourth CREATIO Arena, where the brightest minds and the best speakers discuss very interesting ideas and questions. I'm your host, Alex Petronenko, product evangelist with CREATIO, joined today by our amazing guest speakers, Steve Whitaker, calling in from London, UK. Steve is a management consultant with Strategic Advisory and former CIO of Oman Arab Bank. Steve is a senior technology executive who specializes in delivering complex digital business and technology transformations in the banking and finance industry. Also today we have David Lasher, our partner with Keen 360. And David is an executive and advisor who has been helping commercial enterprises and public agencies to solve problems and improve performance with information technology for more than 20 years. And last but not the least, my dear friend, Eric Hale, our Director of Global Sales Enablement. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for finding the time, and thank you for joining this arena, where today our topic is really try to dig deep into the discussion of what should be the priority for, forward-thinking tech leaders. Is it fostering innovation or just keeping up with the current business demand? I would encourage all of our participants and attendees to vote on the broadcast page. You've got two opinions on the bottom side of your screen. You also have the option to access the chat, share your thoughts, ask your questions, and we'll make sure to try point those out and address some of them during this arena. So, gentlemen, let's kick it off, and really let's start. Let's try first of all, share some initial thoughts about this very interesting topic. Steve, what is your take as a former CIO of a very large bank in terms of where should be the focus of an organization and of a tech leader? Is it about innovating? Is it about bringing these technology innovations, or really focusing on the internal business demands of the staff, of the employees, of the users? What do you think?
Okay, well, thanks, Alec, and thanks for allowing me to speak today. I'm going to unfortunately give the grey answer, which is there's no right and wrong with this. The one thing there's a couple of things I would say though to start off the discussion. And firstly, technology and business should always be aligned. So driving an innovation agenda should not be in isolation as a technology function. It should always be aligned to what the business value you're going to create actually is. So when you talk about the business agenda and what they're trying to push through, if it needs to be aligned to an innovation slant rather than you do innovation alongside it. They both have to be coupled together. So apologies that it's not that there's no right and wrongs. But the second thing, and I think this is where I guess new ways of governing, new ways of working come into this, in that because there's no right or wrong answer, you shouldn't necessarily make the decision at the start of the year as part of your budgeting cycle that we're going left or we're going right. What you need to create is a mechanism by which you can get the balance right based on the point in time that you're at. So rather than making one decision every 12 months, you create a decision-making capability that allows you to judge based on the value creation that you're going to get from either an innovation environment or a banking environment. There's always going to be a finite amount of funding, but how you distribute that funding should not be decided at the outset of 12 months, because particularly as we've seen in 2020, that outcome will change significantly, and you need to have the ability and governance and controls to be able to adapt to that, rather than kind of constantly set in stone what you think you're going to do for the next 12 months.
Yeah, I see where you're going, and this is a very, very balanced answer coming from a very experienced Brit. And sorry for that. So interesting thoughts. We're gonna go deep into those in a couple of minutes. But David, what is your opinion? Because I feel like you might be leaning towards one of the answers more rather than balancing it out.
Yeah, I'm the American, so I'll take one position or the other, right? So, Alex, we were talking earlier this week, and you've put in front of us an either or question that, as Steve pointed out, is really a both question, right? You're in the real world, you're going to be calibrating, and the calibration is going to depend on circumstances. It could be specific to your company. It could be something that's general, like what we're all dealing with and responding to with the pandemic. But there is a first priority. I want to key on that word priority and echo something that I thought I heard Steve say, which is that, wherever you end up on the calibration specific to your company because of events, the first priority is really communication, right? That's what's most important. You need to be communicating to your peers and upward. You need to be communicating to your stakeholders, the people you serve, outwardly and down into your own team. You got to be communicating whatever the decision arrived at is, as to why that decision was made. How did we get here, and what the implications are going to be. So whatever somebody feels in their organization the right calibration strategy might be, the communication is paramount. That's I think the first point I would make. But other than that, I would say, and we'll continue the discussion, but I'm going to have a point of view that is that unless you're unfortunately in the hospitality industry, um, uh, I'm going to be making the case for innovation here today. Okay.
Okay, well, I do share some of the thoughts on the innovation, and actually, when we just kicked it off, right from the start, those that the audience that we had in the very beginning kind of started leaning towards the innovation, right? So we had the breakdown about 77 pro innovation and almost a quarter towards the existing business demands. And this is already like an interesting way to look at this question, but I'm pretty sure that, Eric, you wanted to share some of the ideas that you had, and maybe tell us what you think, right? From your experience and from your communication with multiple different customers that we have and you had in your past.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think both Steve and David make great points, and our current environment is kind of putting us, in this challenging question. Do we innovate, or do we do what's necessary to keep the lights on? And I couldn't agree more. It really depends on the industry that you're in, but the one thing that and I'm also going to take an opinion on this, and I'm going to go back to the financial crisis of 2008. And if we look at it, the driving factor behind the recovery after that recession was the proliferation of startups, right? So innovation was incredibly important. If you think about the startups that came after the 2008 crisis, companies like WhatsApp, Uber, Dropbox, these are all household names now. So this is what got the economy back up and running back in 2008. So my position on it is we have to always be innovating, preparing for what's the best case or worst case scenario after we come out of this situation. Really, we have to be focused on those innovations that are going to help us through that time. And again, history repeats itself, right? And I'm a big supporter of innovation going forward.
Well, as much as I hate dividing this just for pro innovation, my personal opinion is that innovation is something that's going to be driving the businesses, and the businesses need to be able to quickly identify those areas where they can innovate within their organizations, whether those are going to be customer facing processes, whether those are going to be internal processes and internal structures, right? If you would tell any organization a year ago that in a year most of their staff is going to be remote, everybody's going to be working from home, and they need to start thinking about building this remote environment, nobody would believe it, right? Now we see that the organizations are actually starting to go deeper and deeper into the understanding of this internal rethinking and rebuilding of the processes, just to be able to support the current environment, right? And if you even think about it, this is where the two areas kind of collide, right? Because the innovation of supporting this remote environment is also colliding with the current business demands, right? Because we are in a position where we have to be remote, so we have to bring innovation to space, right? So again, for me, it is kind of like a combination of both, right? Because sometimes the demand will be building the need in innovation. Sometimes the tech leaders need to start thinking forward. They need to start looking into the future ahead of time, ahead of rising business demand. But here's another thing, right? And another thought. And sorry, Steve, you wanted to say something?
Well, no, please carry on, and then I'll.
No. You're our guest. Go ahead.
I think, don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely pro innovation. I wouldn't enter into a new role if there wasn't innovation involved. I think one of the, and I'd just like to pick up on something that David said, which or alluded to. Organizations don't spend enough time, I don't think, deciding where they want to be on the innovation curve, right? So they either lurch into, oh, we must be innovative, but can't define what that actually means, or no, we must do business as usual, because that's what we've always done. And I think it's there are forces, market forces, and even political agendas that need to be assessed in order to define where you want to be on that innovation journey. Whether are you passive? Are you game changing? Do you want to just enhance your current digital product offerings, or current offerings via a digital product? Or do you want to kind of completely change the model? Right? Yeah. And organizations, those things do need to evolve, but organizations need to have a view on where they want to go to determine how much of that innovation agenda they want to actually pick pockets on.
Okay, interesting thought. And David, what's your take on this kind of collision between and synergy between innovation and demand?
It's calibration. In the spirit of the arena that we have here, I might take a punch at Eric, if I may. A verbal punch? Is that okay?
Absolutely. This is why we're here.
So if I can exaggerate Eric's point about the last big downturn of 08, 09, he made the point that he brought the example of the startups, right? We saw coming out of that downturn, let's just say the Ubers and whomever else, right? Well, I would say that they didn't have much of a decision in front of them. The curve that Steve was talking about, right? I mean, innovation or steady state, the basics, the foundations, it's an easy decision for them. They take their VC money, right? And they put it 100%, every 100 pennies of every dollar into the innovation. They basically starve their people. Well, they're not building infrastructure, right? And they're hoping that they make it through a few gates, right? And if they don't, they go out of business, right? But that's the model, that's the culture. So I wouldn't say that we want to put startups into the mix any more than our colleagues who might be in the hospitality industry right now, right? I mean, they've just got one mission. I think the question is, okay, if you're not a startup and if you're not in severe distress, it's where do you calibrate, right? And I would echo what Steve just said. It's getting beyond, okay, innovation. What specifically does that mean for our company, right? What does that mean? Because at a time like this, what's really important is not to spread the innovation dollars that are available like peanut butter too thin across the sandwich, right? I think that at this point in time, the mindset of tech leaders needs to be, what are the critical few, right?
Yeah.
Where can I serve my organization by cutting back on some of my innovation because I have to? And what are the critical few items that I need to make the case to continue to fund? Because whatever those investments are bringing about, they're going to be critical to us being in the right position when the economy starts coming back, right? I think that's the lens. Where do we want to be when we start getting back to the normal kinds of business and a healthy economy?
I think David's absolutely spot on there. I think kind of we need to start to move towards value-based decision making, and you can to create guardrails on where that funding will go, but then to let that let where that money is spent evolve as you're going through, based on forces that are changing constantly, rather than sticking to a single agenda. And that's kind of what I was alluding to right at the start. It isn't about either or, but as David said, you could have picked the few once you've decided on what innovation means to you as an organization. I think it's also important, as David alluded to, in that existing companies have existing shareholders and board members, etc. So unlike the greenfield startups, they have to make sure that their existing business kind of grows alongside this innovation agenda, or at least maintains itself alongside the innovation, and hopefully the two marry each other, because it's all about then becomes shareholder value. So what is the value I'm getting on the investment that I'm spending? Because it's after all, it's not the CIO or the head of technology's money.
Yeah, interesting. I think this is the first time that I see Eric's argument being completely destroyed by our speakers today.
No, I don't think it's a destroy.
Think about, again, just what the economy is focused on. Like here in Boston, we're putting together these large innovative ecosystems to not only support startups, but also bring together essential stakeholders, like from government agencies, academic institutions, industry leaders, and venture capital as well, right? To make it easy for entrepreneurs and others to launch new businesses. And I think Alex, so that just speaks to like how we're going to recover from all of this. But if we look at it in terms of existing organizations, right? And maybe this is good for you, Steve, because something that you had mentioned, Alex. So we've had to adapt, right? Banks in particular, right? Let's just say for a branch location. Because of the lockdowns, branch locations may have had a drive-through, drive-up banking, but you could not go into the branch. So they've had to find new ways of supporting their customers. Their customers are not going away. They still need to be supported. So they've had to find new ways, to deal with that problem today. But is that method that we put in place today to manage our customers going to shape the way that we deal with our customers tomorrow? So, Steve, is there going to be the necessity to have branch locations?
Okay.
Is it going to turn into
brilliant,
like a Capital One, right? Maybe it's a cafe where someone could talk to a virtual ATM and have those transactions.
So you've raised two, well, more than two, but 2 points I'd really like to pick up on. The first one is there is absolutely a need for these innovation communities, all right? And I think what businesses are finding hard to do is how do they replicate that, or how do they engage in those innovation communities, that be they for startups or whatever they're for. So, and they are absolutely absolutely critical to the digital ecosystem that we're now operating in, and I think it's really important. The second thing, and more close to home, around the banking. So banks as they currently stand, bricks and mortar, are dead, right? Whether it's now or it's 10 years time, but the need for bricks and mortar for banking, as has been accelerated by certainly the recent situations, but open banking is coming, and is probably the largest innovation that will happen in the banking sphere. And it's coming really quickly, because what's happening is it's no longer about having a bank on a phone. That's the first evolution of the digital agenda. It's about the ecosystems to which banking products, rather than banks, belong. Right? So you have to think of it as the life experience that causes somebody to need to borrow money, or somebody has excess money. What is that? How did that happen? and get involved, and the banks need to be involved in the ecosystems that allow them to participate digitally in that world. You get a generation, millennials, Generation Z, don't want to have to get up and walk to a bank to go and open an account. It's just not on. You get, if you can't swipe right or left, then you can't do it.
Mhm.
So Steve, I am not a financial services expert, but your proposition there that the brick and mortar goes away, to me, is saying that banking becomes mere transaction business, processing movements of money. I submit that banking and other industries will never be just that it's always about customer service, and the way that you deliver that customer service might change. What brick and mortar means might change. I just had my first experience this spring. I walked into a DC outlet. I think it was Bank of America, because that's my bank. And I was fascinated because it was on a corner of downtown DC, and they've reduced their footprint. But I walked up to a kiosk that was not just a robot behind the kiosk, right? It was somebody sitting in Kansas. I had to ask her. She wouldn't give me more information than that, right? But I absolutely needed and wanted and am willing to pay for that human service, because I think that's part of what the proposition is. Are we saying different things?
No, actually, David, that's a really good point that you raised. What I'm saying is the evolution of that is that what's wrong with having that human interaction on a tablet? If the lady was in Kansas or wherever she was, then she wasn't actually there face to face with you, but there was a augmented reality that allowed you to communicate with her. I guess my point being is there shouldn't be the need to walk down the high street or drive to an outlet that enables you to perform your banking transactions. But the other point that you raised, which is fundamental and absolutely right, is the customer experience needs to be right. How you deliver these services is paramount. And guess what? If the customer experience says, yes, I do want to go and sit down face to face in a branch with a person, then I'm absolutely, firstly, I'll eat my hat, but secondly, you're absolutely right. I'm wrong. There will be the need for bricks and mortar.
Well, this is, sorry, Steve, but this is actually an interesting point that we're talking about now, because I had this thought in my head for a couple of minutes as we were talking about the value that the innovation will bring, and now we're talking about the the actual customer experience, and we're talking about the delivery of the services, right? Now, if you think about it, now that we are in the 21st century, we have more and more amazing technology emerging every month, every year, right? And the areas of innovation are endless, right? There are so many ways that you can improve and you can innovate within your organization and any organization as it is. So don't you think that it would be possible, as like a future for certain organizations just focus on innovation or take this as a priority, that they will get stuck in this never-ending cycle of implementations of certain technologies that by the time that they are implemented, if they do not allow rapid implementation and accelerated delivery time, they're going to see that the patterns of their customers have already been changed in their journeys and in what they expect. So this will be basically time and money spent without any outcome.
And Alex, I think, if you allow me, I think that's a really good point, and that's why what we're seeing is an absolute need, from my perspective, to shift to a much more lean, agile type environment where having these 12-month projects is no longer something that that organizations can actually survive with, because, as you just pointed out, what you said 12 months ago may not, the market will have changed completely, or the experience will have changed. So we need to become much more, as I said, a lean, agile mindset. So we have to experiment more and try something. If it works, great, pursue it. If not, then what are the other options? If it's pivot or persevere. So go back to the drawing board or carry on with it. But it's always about nurturing what you're doing rather than assuming you know everything from day one. And I think that's really important.
Sorry, Steve. I build on that, but the way I think of it is that it's portfolio management.
Yes.
Right? And I think that IT leaders need to think like financiers when it comes to their portfolios. And Alex makes a good point about the timelines. The key is at ever shorter time horizons, we need to, as IT leaders, be defining what the success factors were for sustaining or killing a given investment, or right. And we have to be brave about recognizing, and our leadership needs to support us in being brave, that some of what we do is going to fail, right? But what we're not going to try to do is keep our failing initiatives living as zombie expenditures that are never going to do anything but bring us down, right? So I think it falls into portfolio management, but thinking. We all have been a lot of us have been program managers, right? And you need your list of what the initiatives are. But what I'm saying is, take the investor mindset in addition to the traditional IT list of projects that are above the line and below the line, and think that way.
Yeah. And David, this is actually an interesting point. I'm sorry, Steve, I'm interrupting you. I just want to kind of explore this thought a little bit more, specifically around being brave and being brave in innovation, because I think that one of those things that are actually determining the answer for any tech leader when it gets to making a decision on which path to go is really if they are willing to take that risk in bringing new technology and bringing innovation into their organization, right? Because it is a little bit more of a safe choice to focus on internal known demand than trying to predict which demand will be appearing on the horizons in a couple of months' time, and that we're trying to kind of already predict with that innovation that we are implementing, right? So, in your experience, David and then Steve, how influential is this mindset of the tech leader of playing on the safe side or actually taking a risk?
Steve, if you don't mind, let me. If you don't have courage, you're not a leader, right?
Yeah.
If you get into a position of leadership and you do not demonstrate courage in some respect or another, that courage does not mean being pugnacious, right? Then you've been put into the wrong position. If you're not bringing courage to the job for your team, for your organization in a constructive manner, then you're at best a manager, and maybe you're just a clerk, or just a technologist.
But on the other side, even any kind of project that you're taking care of or you're starting, even if it's focusing on internal business demands and organization needs, is still a risk. So there is going to be slightly lower level of courage that is needed.
Well, I think we're saying the same things. I go back to what I opened with. It's about communication, right? And I think the mistake that I sometimes see is, and maybe a little too frequently, is people who get into IT leadership positions and they think that it's about talking about technology, and it's not, right? It's explaining about what the technology does. And I think that one thing that all technology leaders need to become very good at is something that's not in human nature, which is how to deliver the answer that is no, right? No, we can't do that. But you can't stop there. You have to take the next steps to explain why and what the options are, right? So that's, we're talking about leadership now. And so those were some of my main thoughts, Alex.
Yeah. And I think that's a a tremendous point that you just made there, David, because again, they have focus. If we look at an IT from an IT perspective, right? There's always going to be kind of a layered approach, right? You're going to have those systems of records where none of that is going to change, but the technology that they're focusing on and what the outcomes are going to be with that, you have to start to look at those systems of what's going to differentiate your company from others, and also what's going to not only differentiate but get you ahead of the competition, right? So it's not so much focused on just the application, but what is going to be the outcome. And as they're focusing, on that technology and those outcomes, those two areas, systems of differentiation, systems of, innovation, those are constantly evolving, right? So that's really where, I think there is that marriage of, IT and business, right? Because it's not so much that top-down strategy anymore of the business saying, hey, we need this, Mr. CIO, go figure out how to make that happen. The CIO is critical in making those decisions now, because we need to put in these systems of differentiation and innovation to stay ahead of the competition. To your point earlier, Alex, talking about the technology that goes behind that, what we're seeing is that point solution or point application proliferation. What I'm seeing, and at least with the customers that I'm talking to, is that there's a major interest in platforms now, right? So rapid application development platforms to standardize that technology so that they can adapt very quickly. So again, not just focusing on the technology to make something happen from that top-down messaging, but having IT involved and being able to innovate rapidly and have them be business minded versus technology minded is really what's going to help companies not only just maintain but also get better and get ahead of the competition as well.
I think David's spot on when he talked about courage. And I think what we're seeing, the CIO agenda is becoming much more, as David has said, it isn't about talking technology. It's about kind of aligning with your business to deliver solutions. But what we're seeing more and more is the CIO having to influence the culture of an organization. You talked about risk appetite, and actually the innovation agenda requires a cultural shift and change of mindset that allows an environment where failure is a growth exercise, not a point the finger and blame. And I think traditionally we've seen you're not allowed to fail, which is why we keep this sustainability of these long-term projects that just hemorrhages good money after bad. What we're actually trying to, what the CIO is now having to do is influence, as I said, the company's culture that allows it to have an innovation agenda where failure is a learning experience. And that's something where the traditional organizations and the traditional heads, I'll refrain from calling them leaders because I think David's absolutely right, lacked that courage. They were sort of, if it's that ability to say, no, that's not right, let's learn from that and do something different, rather than you must persevere because I've said that's the answer. And that's a very different mindset and cultural shift that we're seeing, that comes with the lean agile, with the DevOps agendas, and is predominantly what drives the innovation capability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great example of that is General Electric. I don't know if you're very familiar with this organization, but their methodology is FastWorks, right? There's actually a book out there that you can go out and download, but that's their methodology is, to innovate and if it's going to fail quickly, right?
Fast,
so that way you can move on and go. So it really is that agile approach, and I'd encourage everybody to. I've worked with General Electric at a couple of different companies now, and it is one of the most innovative agile companies that I've come across, which is strange because it goes back to, Thomas Edison. It's a very old company, but they are on the forefront of innovation, and that's the exact approach that they take. If we're going to fail, let's fail quickly, but we're going to continue that innovation process. So Fast Works is the name of the book.
And I think the innovation agenda encourages or needs that sort of thing. And also it's aligned to what David said earlier about managing your portfolio. So you don't fund projects, product fund. Okay? So allow things to have a certain amount of funding that you can choose, because the knowledge worker knows as much, if not more, than the top level executives around how does that product evolve and develop, rather than I need this project and I need this project. And that's all talking about the portfolio, some of which may be experimentation, now called innovation, right?
Yeah, and Steve, this is actually an interesting topic that you brought this up, because I've seen that we have a question in the chat actually around how do you prove that you need funding for the innovation, right? So if we can probably answer that and continue exploring in this area and extending your thought, I think that would be great, and that would give some very good info for our audience.
Okay.
So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about here is, as I say, not having a list of projects that cost X amount of money. This is about having some guardrails around product or value value streams that allows that money, that funding, to be spent to enhance that product. And let the product owners and the product managers determine how that money gets spent at certain points in time, rather than have them dictated to about what they must do over the course of a year. That way, if there's a need for innovation, if there's a need for some experimentation, then that's the product manager's prerogative to set funding aside to do that. Rather than, and then if the next month the belts need tightening because there's been a shift in the environment, in the market forces, then he may need to do something different. But it's all about having that ability to manage the portfolio, as David had said, based on investment opportunity, or indeed on cost save opportunity at a point in time, not as what I predict the next 12 months are going to be.
Yeah.
Steve,
sorry.
Yeah, so Steve, would you agree from your experience that if we're talking about a CIO, then, and I'm distinguishing between a tech intensive company that's got a CTO that's kind of, that's what the company's about, right? We've got a CIO, and if I heard the question and it was about how do you come up with these estimates, numbers, it is not the CIO's job to speak to the top line business opportunity, the future revenue line. I think the CIO plays strongest talking about the cost function, the cost line, right? And if you do this, it'll cost because even if the CIO does want to speak on and might be right about the top line, nobody else in the organization is going to believe him or her. It's just not right. It's just
it's not your job. Yeah, it's not.
The role doesn't have permission, right?
I do agree on that. But I think what we're seeing is a blurring of those lines, especially as you move into, again, as I say, product management and product funding, where teams are no longer siloed teams of IT, operations, front office, whatever functions. That teams now, self-managing cross-functional teams, which is where your product alignment comes, is about that cross-functionality. So the cost and the value created works hand in hand across those two teams. And the real art of the CIO now is making sure that all of those teams start to function together to align to that value, rather than I've got a development function, I've got a test function, I've got an infrastructure function, etc. Those traditional silos, I think, are actually causing part of the problem that stifles the innovation, because the amount of handoffs that you then get delays these things. And coming back to your point, doesn't allow us to pivot to be able to say that's going right or that's going wrong.
Yeah. Interesting, interesting. And gentlemen, if you don't mind, I just wanted to address another question that I've received from the chat area, right? And kind of try to answer that one as well. And David, I would probably ask you to take this one since you were talking about willingness to take risk, being, courageous, and so on and so forth. So the question from the attendees is what practices or models will keep other leaders in the business aligned with that willingness to fail? I would probably rephrase willingness to take risk, right, rather than to fail, but because accepting failure is already a failure on its own. But what do you think about having other leaders in the business being aligned with the risk and willingness to take risk?
Yeah, and whomever asked that question gave me opportunity to make a point about risk and failure within two different environments, private sector, public sector. Right. So let me get to public sector second. Appetite for risk, it's going to be an organizational culture question. I mean, there's no easy answer here. I don't have a recipe. Right? If it's dialogue, there's got to be trust amongst the people who are leaders across different parts of the organization. And I think that probably what a tech leader needs to do is they need to make sure on their straight line reporting structure and with their CFO that there is a very good understanding of what the risks are. Because if you're silent on those risks, when they do arise and bite you, as they will, you're exposed. You're exposed, and there are going to be consequences. But if you're proactive and doing your best job in your own way, you've got to remain true to yourself, right? Make the case, and look, if your leadership has questions, if they're coming from a different place, they use different prisms, let them ask their questions, ask them, encourage them to ask their questions. But you've got to be proactive in making sure that the key people understand what the risks are, and that's just part of the job. Let me mention something on public sector, since I brought it up. I want to open up the aperture. I think that maybe there should be a whole nother session devoted to the question of what does innovation mean within the context of public sector agencies in states, federal level, state level, whatever. I was recently a CIO and COO of a large state agency. I know the dynamics in that environment as well as I've lived it in that environment as well as the commercial sector or environment. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't know it already, that innovation is vastly different in that world than in the commercial world. And there's little to no appetite for failure within in public agencies, right? The political consequences are potentially too great. The project that goes awry cannot be a headline in the newspapers or other media. So I don't want to take us down into a long conversation of what those differences are, but you still need innovation. You need, as a tech leader within a public sector agency, but what your scope of opportunity is and how you become innovative, it is different. So that just a little tangent that was on my mind during our discussion.
I think
that these are all great points, but Alex, we had an arena a couple of weeks ago, and it was the role of CIOs today, right? And I think, like, in terms of communications, what's happening is that CIOs, not only have to have the technology know-how, but also have to have a deep understanding of industry and business, right? So that they can tie and marry those two together. So when we talk about risk and products, failing, if we're tying those back to, business value and growth, and having that, conversation on, here's where we're going to take a risk because we see this business value and we see the ability to grow. I think that that's how you get alignment amongst your teams. And the CIO is going to play a major role in that, right? Because they have the technology know-how, but also can talk to how this is going to have business value and growth throughout the organization. So I think that the new CIO, of today has to have the ability to do both. And they're going to be taking a larger role in that conversation. I think that you're going to have business conversations and planning sessions with the CIO now, rather than that top down. Hey, here's what we want, go make it happen. The CIO needs to be intimately involved in that conversation, and also needs to have an understanding of business, and that makes risk a little more tolerable across organizations, if we're tying it back to here's the business value, here's the ability to grow. And if that fails, it's going to fail, but at least you have that plan to tie back to. And that's in sales, that's what we do, right? Like when we go out and talk to people, we're all talking about business value and growth. Why would you make the decision to go with my product? Is here. We have to create a business case. We have to create a return on investment, and what is that going to be? There's always a risk anytime you go with the technology, but if you have that outcome in mind, risk tolerance grows, right? Like you're able to put that message across an organization.
I think you're right, and I also think David raised a really interesting point about that sort of the distinction between public and private, and I think it comes back down to where do you want to play in the innovation space, or where can you play in the innovation space? I'll give you a really good example. As a bank in a GCC country, the regulator will not allow you to have your data stored outside of the country. As a consequence, that puts considerable pressure or challenge against a cloud type environment and any SaaS-based capability. But it's also, so those sorts of geopolitical things, as well as your own internal appetite, where your competitive advantage is, where your customers want to be, are all questions that lead you to where you want, in which space you want to play or play. But then it then comes back to what David said right at the start about communication, right? Communicate what you can yourself to the business by communicating with them about the pros and cons of all of these things. And that comes then back to your point about the CIO agenda is now one of aligning all of these beautiful pieces together and working alongside the business and making sure that the communication about reward and risk is clear and transparent.
Gentlemen, I like the way that we've, by almost the end of our arena discussion, came back to the very first statement that we had from David. I think this is very interesting and very valuable point, actually, and this kind of proves it. So we're about to close up, and I would probably, as we usually do, ask for 30-second last closing remarks, kind of supporting your overall ideas and your conclusions that you kind of came to as part of this conversation. So David, if you would give us the honor to kind of open up the closing remarks.
Let me come off mute. Let me start by, to the degree the question I received was kind of coaching advice, let me amend on thought that, if you're going to your leadership, your CFO, your CEO, you're saying, here's what the risk is, you have to make sure that you are not coming across as whining and CYA, engaging in CYA, right? It can't come across that way. And the other thing is, you have to realize that you are going to fail. It is inevitable in the IT side. I think it's more inevitable in the IT side than any other part of the business. There's no hiding our IT failures, and you can't be an IT leader without being resilient. And when those failures happen, trust in yourself and take the 6 and 12-month perspective. But to wrap up, I think that it's about calibrating for your organization and communicating. And let me thank you for inviting me, and thank everybody. I really enjoyed this and hope we can do it again sometime. All right?
Absolutely. Steve?
Yeah, I'd echo what David had said, and I think I think there's a number of I was going to say probably quite badly a number of C words being used today, which I think are really quite important. To sum it up, encourage collaboration, communication, culture. Right, those things plus I'm sure a whole load of other C's and others actually drive where you as an organization want to operate in the innovation space, right? and that will drive out whether you're on how far along the innovation answer you will actually be.
Interesting. Eric, your closing remarks?
Yeah, again, echo David's statement. This has been fun, guys. A lot of interesting insight. You guys come from a great background, so it's always good to have that feedback. In terms of the topic of today's arena, innovation. Whether to innovate or keep the lights on. In my opinion, I think that you need to have that strategy, and again, that strategy needs to be aligned across the entire organization. But you have to be prepared for what's coming, good or bad. And the only way to get through that is to innovate. You need to prepare now. It's chess, not checkers, in order to excel. So I fully stand behind my innovation approach. I know that certain organizations have to keep the lights on, but again, things will get back to normal when we have to be prepared either way. And we have to have those innovations to move ourselves into the future. Thanks again, Alex. Thanks for hosting us here. It's been great.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for spending time with us today. It was an incredibly engaged and interesting conversation. Just to kind of summarize this arena, I wanted to share some numbers. We had 250 participants and attendees that were listening in and sharing their thoughts and ideas. And the audience actually split 70 pro innovation and 30 pro current business demand. So I think that, the numbers speak for themselves. The majority of our attendees agree that the business should innovate. They should be thinking about the future and what's going to be coming in the nearest time. And of course, this is just proving that the world is just moving forward and everybody is accelerating in their, industries and technology implementations. At this point, I'm gonna again thank you all. Thank you for staying with us. I want to invite everyone who's been today with us to join our next arena that is going to be happening at the same time as today on June 18th. Our topic for the next arena is going to be digital transformation. Is leadership or technology the biggest challenge? And we're going to have again couple of amazing speakers. Dan Ellman, analyst with Nucleus Research from the United States, and Stefan Duda, managing director with our partner Qualisoft from Germany. Eric, I assume I'll see you there as well. And of course, I'll be hosting it as always. Gentlemen, one last time, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you and having you here. And thank you again to all of the attendees. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.